The dusty streets of a small, remote African village were silent as the evening azan echoed through the air. At the heart of the town lived Zainab, a 19-year-old girl known for her remarkable memory of the Quran. She had spent years perfecting her recitation, earning the respect and admiration of her family and community. People often said her voice carried the purity of angels, and her faith was unwavering, but her piety wasn't her only trait. Zainab was also beautiful in a way that seemed otherworldly. Her almond-shaped eyes sparkled with warmth and wisdom, and her kind heart shone through in every action she took. Yet, life for Zainab was far from perfect. Poverty had its grip on her family, and despite her spiritual accomplishments, they struggled to make ends meet. Zainab's father, Baba Suleiman, was a humble farmer. His crops had been failing year after year due to drought, leaving the family in dire straits. As the eldest of 5 siblings, Zainab felt an unspoken responsibility to help. However, in the deeply conservative and traditional community they lived in, opportunities for women were almost non-existent. One evening, Baba Suleiman received a visitor, a wealthy businessman named Chief Okonkwo, whose influence stretched across neighboring villages. Okonkwo was known for his sharp tongue and even sharper bargains. The man was notorious for using his wealth to exploit others, but desperation often silenced protests against his behavior. Okonkwo came with an offer. He would provide Baba Suleiman with enough money to save his farm and his family. But there was one condition: Zainab must marry his son Dada T first. The offer seemed like a blessing in disguise. Baba Suleiman saw this as a chance to pull his family out of poverty. But when he asked about Okonkwo's son, the chief's face darkened. "He is unique," Okonkwo said, avoiding eye contact. He gave no further explanation, but desperation blinded Zainab's father to the vagueness of the reply. When Baba Suleiman returned home, he hesitated before explaining the proposal to Zainab. The girl's heart sank as she heard his words, but she didn't protest. Her obedience to her father and her faith in Allah's will left her with no choice but to accept, even though a part of her trembled with unease. The wedding was arranged hastily, with no opportunity for Zainab to meet her groom beforehand. The ceremony itself was simple and somber. Villagers whispered among themselves, wondering why the groom hadn't appeared publicly. Zainab's sisters tried to reassure her, but the pit in her stomach only grew deeper. The real shock came on the wedding night. As Zainab was escorted to her new home, a sprawling estate miles away from her village, she was met with an unimaginable sight. Her husband was not a man, but a dog. A massive, well-groomed dog stood before her, wagging its tail. It was dressed in ceremonial robes, a gold chain around its neck. Zainab froze, her breath catching in her throat. This must be some cruel joke, she thought, but the servants around her acted as though nothing was amiss. Chief Okonkwo appeared, a twisted grin on his face. "You see, my dear, my son is cursed. This dog is his spirit vessel," he said. His tone was casual, almost mocking, as though expecting Zainab to accept the absurdity without question. He went on to explain that his family had been under a generational curse, and the only way to break it was through a sacred union with someone as pure and devoted as Zainab. Zainab was horrified. "You deceived us," she cried, her voice trembling with rage and despair. "This is not a marriage. This is a crime against Allah, against humanity." Tears streamed down her face as she realized the extent of her father's desperation and Okonkwo's deceit. But Chief Okonkwo's face hardened. "You think you have a choice?" he sneered. "Your family is already enjoying the wealth I've given them. Do you want them to lose everything? Do you want them to starve?" Zainab was trapped. Her faith and dignity clashed with the harsh reality of her circumstances. That night, she sat alone in the ornate bedroom prepared for her, unable to sleep. The dog lay on the other side of the room, oblivious to her torment. Her heart cried out to Allah for guidance. She prayed for strength, for a way out of this nightmare. But the silence of the night offered no answers. The morning after her wedding, Zainab awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside the large window of her new home. The beauty of the estate was a cruel contrast to the storm raging within her. She hadn't slept. Her mind had been consumed by questions she couldn't answer and prayers that seemed to hang unanswered in the air. She had been raised to believe that Allah tested his believers, but this test felt unbearable. How could a Hafiz-e-Quran, someone who had dedicated her life to the words of Allah, be subjected to such humiliation? The memory of the wedding night, the reality of her so-called husband haunted her. As she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clutching the tasbih she always carried. The door creaked open. A servant entered, an older woman with kind eyes but a wary expression. She placed a tray of food on the table and hesitated, as if wanting to say something but unsure how. Zainab seized the moment. "Please, tell me," she said, her voice trembling. "What is the truth behind all this? Is there truly a curse, or is this just cruelty?" The servant glanced nervously at the door, then leaned closer. "The curse is real," she whispered. "Or so the chief believes. His son, Akani, was once a healthy young man, but a strange illness took hold of him years ago. The healers couldn't save him, and his body died. Yet the witch doctors insisted his soul could be preserved, but only in the body of an animal." Zainab's breath caught. "And they chose a dog?" The woman nodded, her face heavy with sorrow. "The chief believes this is the only way to keep his son alive. He thinks marrying you someone pure and righteous will break the curse and return Akani to his human form." But she trailed off, her eyes filled with unspoken pity. "But what?" Zainab pressed, desperation creeping into her voice. "No one truly knows if the curse can be broken," the woman admitted. "Many believe the chief is simply mad with grief. Others think he's using the curse as an excuse to justify his cruelty and control. I wish I could say more, but be careful, my child. This house is full of secrets, and the chief does not tolerate defiance." The servant left quickly, leaving Zainab with more questions than answers. Her heart ached for Akani, for the life he had lost, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used as a pawn in a twisted game. The thought of being trapped in this nightmare forever was suffocating. Later that day, Zainab was summoned to meet Chief Okonkwo. She was led to a grand sitting room, where he lounged in a high-backed chair, flanked by two armed guards. The dog, her so-called husband, sat at his feet, its tail wagging as if oblivious to the tension in the room. Chief Okonkwo's piercing gaze met hers. "You're adjusting well, I see," he said, his voice laced with mockery. Zainab stiffened. "I am not adjusting," she said, her tone steady despite the fear in her chest. "I am enduring." The chief's grin faltered, and a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. "Careful, girl. I gave your family a life they could never dream of. You owe me your obedience." Zainab's fingers clenched the hem of her dress, her anger barely contained. "You bought my father's desperation," she said quietly, "but you will not buy my soul." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the chief laughed, a low, menacing sound. "We'll see," he said. "You'll learn soon enough that resistance is futile." As the days passed, Zainab was kept isolated within the estate, forbidden from contacting her family or venturing beyond the gates. The servants avoided her, their fear of the chief outweighing any sympathy they might have felt, but Zainab refused to lose hope. She prayed relentlessly, seeking guidance and strength. One night, as she sat by the window with her Quran open in her lap, she heard a faint scratching at the door. Her heart raced. Was it the dog? She stood slowly, her pulse quickening as the scratching continued. When she opened the door, she was startled to find not the dog, but a young servant boy, no older than 10. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his hands, which he thrust toward her before darting away. Zainab unfolded the note, her hands shaking. The message was hastily scrawled but clear. "Meet me in the garden at midnight. Trust no one." She stared at the note, her mind racing. Was this a trap? Or could it be the key to her escape? Either way, she knew she couldn't ignore it. The air was heavy with silence as the clock struck midnight. Zainab quietly slipped out of her room, clutching the note in her hand. The vast estate was cloaked in darkness, with only the pale glow of the moon lighting her way. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest as she crept through the hallways, praying that no one would see her. The garden was even more beautiful at night, its flowers glowing faintly under the moonlight. But Zainab had no time to admire the beauty. She scanned the shadows, searching for whoever had sent the note. The garden seemed empty, and for a moment, fear gripped her. Had she been tricked? Was the chief watching, waiting to punish her for daring to disobey him? Then, from behind a cluster of tall bushes, a figure emerged. It was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with sharp features and eyes that darted nervously around the garden. His clothes were plain, those of a servant, but there was something defiant in his posture. "You came," he said in a low voice, his tone a mix of relief and urgency. Zainab took a cautious step closer, her grip tightening on the note. "Who are you? Why did you call me here?" The man glanced over his shoulder before answering. "My name is Yusuf. I've been working in this house for years, and I've seen terrible things. When I heard about your marriage, I knew I had to do something." Zainab's eyes narrowed. "Why? What do you want from me?" Yusuf shook his head. "I want nothing from you. I want to help you. You don't deserve this life, this prison. I've seen what the chief is capable of, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing." His sincerity was clear in his voice, but Zainab's mistrust lingered. "And why should I trust you? What if this is a trap?" Yusuf sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't blame you for doubting me, but think about it. If I was working for the chief, I wouldn't be risking my life meeting you in secret. If he finds out, I'm as good as dead." Zainab studied him for a moment, her instincts telling her he was being truthful. "Then what do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. Yusuf leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The curse. The story about the chief's son, it's all a lie." The words hit Zainab like a thunderbolt. "What?" she gasped. "But the servants, the villagers, they all believe it. That's because the chief made sure they would." Yusuf said bitterly. "His son did die, but there was no curse, no spirit vessel. The dog is just a dog. The chief uses the story to manipulate people, to control them. And you're part of his sick game." Zainab felt the ground shift beneath her. The idea that she had been deceived so completely was both infuriating and heartbreaking. "But why? Why would he do this to me?" Yusuf hesitated, as if unsure whether to reveal the full truth. "The chief is obsessed with power," he said finally. "He believes that marrying a Hafiz-e-Quran like you will bring him divine favor, that it will make him untouchable. You're a symbol to him, not a person." The weight of Yusuf's words pressed down on Zainab, but they also ignited a spark of defiance within her. She had been used, lied to, and humiliated, but she refused to be broken. "Then we need to stop him," she said, her voice steady. Yusuf nodded. "I've been waiting for someone like you, someone strong enough to stand up to him. I have a plan, but it's risky. If we fail..." Zainab met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I've already lost everything. What more can he take from me?" Yusuf hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "This is a map of the estate," he said, handing it to her. "There's a hidden passage in the basement that leads outside. If we can get to it, we can escape." Zainab's heart raced. "Escape? What about my family? The chief will retaliate against them." Yusuf placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I've thought of that. I'll send a message to your father, warning him to leave the village. But first, we need to get you out of here." Zainab nodded, clutching the map tightly. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow night," Yusuf said. "I'll distract the guards, but you'll need to be ready. And Zainab, be careful. The chief is always watching." As Zainab returned to her room, a mix of fear and determination filled her heart. For the first time since her wedding, she felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know if Yusuf's plan would work, but she was willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. But as she closed the door behind her, she didn't notice the shadow lurking at the end of the hallway, the figure who had been silently watching her every move.